The first thing I saw that morning was red and blue lights flashing across my lake like somebody had set police sirens loose inside the fog. It was 5:42 a.m., cold enough that my coffee was steaming through the cracked kitchen window, and 3 sheriff's cruisers were parked halfway across my ranch road, while a group of HOA residents stood nearby in golf carts wearing robes and holding travel mugs like this was some kind of neighborhood entertainment. Then Deputy Ross stepped out, adjusted his duty belt, and told me I needed to leave my own property immediately. Big mistake. I stood there in my work gloves beside the cattle fence I'd been repairing since sunrise, listening to this deputy explain that Holloway Shores HOA had filed an official trespassing complaint against me for unauthorized access to community land. Behind him stood Vanessa Holloway herself, wrapped in white linen and designer sunglasses even though the sun hadn't fully come up yet, smiling that fake church lady smile people use right before they try to ruin your life. The woman pointed one manicured finger toward my lake and said, "Mr. Mercer, we've been patient long enough. This road, this shoreline, and this entire section now belong to the HOA." I almost laughed. The smell of wet cedar drifted through the morning air, while my old cattle dog Rufus growled low beside my boots. And somewhere out across the water a loon called through the mist like it already knew this day was going to end badly for somebody. "Not me, sir," Deputy Ross said quietly, looking uncomfortable as hell. "I'm asking you peacefully to step away from the property until this dispute gets settled." I looked past him toward the giant stone entrance sign the HOA installed 6 months earlier, the one that read Holloway Shores Luxury Lake Community in giant gold letters. And right beneath that sign I spotted something most people would have missed completely. A weathered iron survey marker buried halfway under fresh landscaping rock. My grandfather's marker. Still there after 53 years. That's when I realized these people had no idea where they were actually standing. Vanessa kept talking while one of the tow truck drivers started hooking chains onto my old livestock trailer parked near the fence line, and the craziest part was how confident they all looked doing it. HOA residents stood there sipping coffee, whispering to each other, probably thinking they were watching some stubborn old rancher finally get forced out by modern development. One guy even pulled out his phone and started recording me. That was her second mistake. I walked slowly toward Deputy Ross, reached into my jacket pocket, and handed him a folded property tax receipt that had my family name on it going back longer than Vanessa Holloway had probably lived in Texas. The deputy unfolded it, frowned, then looked back at me. "Mr. Mercer," he said carefully, "the county maps show this parcel belongs to the HOA now." "Yeah," I replied, staring straight at Vanessa. "That's because the county maps got changed." The whole group went quiet for a second. Not long. Vanessa crossed her arms and gave this little laugh like I was some confused old man yelling about UFOs from a porch swing. "You really should have hired a lawyer sooner," she said. "This land stopped being yours years ago." I nodded slowly like I was considering her advice, while the lake water slapped softly against the dock my father built back in 1974. Then I looked at Deputy Ross and pointed toward the stone HOA entrance behind him. "Deputy," I said calmly, "you might want to move those cruisers." He blinked. "Why?" I took a sip of coffee and smiled for the first time all morning. "Because every inch under your tires belongs to me. If some HOA tried to kick you off land your family owned for generations, tell me right now in the comments what you'd do. Because trust me, this story gets a whole lot crazier once we start digging through the county records." And here's the thing. That little survey marker buried under Vanessa Holloway's fancy landscaping was about to destroy an entire neighborhood. I did not sleep much after those deputies finally drove away that morning. The lake stayed quiet once the sirens disappeared, but the silence felt different now. Heavier somehow, like the ranch itself knew strangers were trying to carve it apart piece by piece. I sat on the old cedar porch with Rufus stretched beside my boots and watched the sun crawl across the water the same way I had almost every morning for the last 37 years. Some places become part of your blood. My grandfather bought Mercer Ranch back in 1968 for $38,000 and a handshake from a cattle rancher who was too old to keep working the land anymore. 83 acres of limestone hills, mesquite trees, shallow pasture, and a spring-fed lake tucked into the middle like God dropped a piece of glass into the Texas dirt. Back then there were no gated communities out here, no fancy signs, no golf carts, no people talking about luxury waterfront living, while sipping imported coffee. Just cattle fences, dirt roads, and neighbors who waved when they drove past. Simpler times. My father used to say you could tell a good man by whether he left a gate open behind him. I believe that. Every memory I have worth keeping happened somewhere on that ranch. I learned to fish standing barefoot on that crooked wooden dock while my dad smoked Marlboros and pretended not to notice me tangling every line I cast into the lake. I learned to drive in an old Ford pickup that barely had brakes, bouncing across pasture trails with my grandfather laughing so hard coffee spilled out of his thermos onto the dashboard. Then years later, I scattered my wife Claire's ashes beneath the cedar trees on the North Ridge after cancer took her faster than either of us could understand. Hardest day of my life. The ranch was the only thing that kept me standing after that. Some men go looking for bars or gambling or trouble when grief tears them apart, but I stayed close to the lake instead. I rebuilt fences, fixed docks, cleared brush, fed cattle. There is something about physical work that quiets your mind long enough to survive another day. That place saved me. Around 2018 was when things started changing out here. Austin kept spreading farther west. Developers started sniffing around hill country land like coyotes around a dying calf, and suddenly everybody with money wanted authentic Texas ranch living, as long as it came with paved sidewalks and a homeowners association telling people what color mailbox they could own. The first time Vanessa Holloway showed up at my gate, she arrived in a white Range Rover wearing sunglasses bigger than my hand and shoes completely useless for dirt roads. She stepped out smiling like we were old friends, even though I had never seen her before in my life. "Mr. Mercer," she said, holding out one perfectly manicured hand. "You own one of the most beautiful properties in the county." That should have warned me right there. Nobody talks like that unless they want something. I remember the smell of expensive perfume mixing with cedar dust while construction crews hammered away in the distance where Holloway Shores was being built across the southern ridge line. Back then it was still mostly bulldozers and survey stakes, but even then I hated the sound. Nature has its own rhythm out here. Wind through grass, frogs near the water, fence chains clinking in the breeze. Then developers show up and suddenly everything sounds metallic and angry. Vanessa spent almost 40 minutes on my porch that day pretending to make friendly conversation before finally getting to the real point. She wanted to buy 20 acres along the lake edge so the subdivision could have expanded waterfront access. I told her no before she even finished the sentence. Her smile tightened just a little. "You might reconsider once the community grows," she said. "Growth is coming whether people like it or not." I still remember exactly how she looked standing there in white linen with sunglasses hanging from her collar while dust swirled around her expensive SUV, like somebody who thought money automatically made them important. She glanced toward my shoreline one last time before leaving and asked, "Did your family ever have the land professionally resurveyed?" That question stayed in my head for days afterward. At the time, I figured she was just fishing for information. I did not realize she was already looking for a way to take the whole damn ranch. At first, Holloway Shores looked like every other expensive subdivision spreading across Texas Hill Country. Fresh asphalt roads curling through old pasture land. Fake stone entry walls with little waterfall fountains. Rows of nearly identical houses painted soft beige and gray, so everything looked clean enough for a magazine cover. The developers even planted imported palm trees near the clubhouse, even though everybody knew palm trees looked ridiculous sitting beside cedar and mesquite. It felt fake from day one. But the people moving in did not know any better. Most of them were retirees from California or Illinois or Arizona who wanted quiet lake views and low property taxes, and Vanessa Holloway sold them this dream that they were buying into some perfect little gated paradise far away from city problems. What they were really buying was her control. Vanessa did not act like a normal HOA president. Normal HOA people complain about trash cans or overgrown grass or somebody painting their fence the wrong color. Vanessa treated Holloway Shores like she was running a private government. Within the first year, she had security patrols driving around in golf carts, drone cameras monitoring the shoreline, community meetings every Thursday night, and printed violation letters taped to people's doors for things as stupid as leaving a fishing pole visible on a porch. The woman loved rules the way some people love football. She fed off it. I remember sitting in one of those HOA meetings about 2 years ago because one of the residents asked me to come explain where the original ranch fence lines used to run before construction started. The meeting took place inside their giant clubhouse overlooking the water, and the whole place smelled like fresh paint and vanilla candles, while soft jazz music played through hidden speakers in the ceiling. Rich people love making everything feel like a hotel lobby. Vanessa stood at the front wearing a cream-colored blazer with a little gold HOA badge clipped to it like she was some kind of sheriff, clicking through a PowerPoint presentation titled Community Future Initiatives. I wish I was joking. She talked for nearly 30 minutes about shoreline optimization, shared recreational access, and regional land partnerships, while residents nodded along like they were listening to a Fortune 500 executive explain world peace. Half those people probably did not even understand what she was saying. That was the point. Then she clicked to a map on the projector screen showing the lake, the subdivision, and part of my ranch shaded in pale blue. As Holloway Shores continues expanding, she said smoothly, we are working toward full community integration of all adjacent waterfront resources. Adjacent waterfront resources. That was her way of talking about my land like it was already hers. I raised my hand and asked, you mean my shoreline? The room went dead quiet. Vanessa smiled without blinking. Mr. Mercer, she said sweetly, the county records regarding boundary alignment are currently under review. Under review. There it was again. That same strange wording she used the first day she came to my porch. I asked her directly what that meant, and she gave this little laugh like I was being difficult in front of the class. Sometimes old rural properties were not surveyed properly decades ago, she said. These things happen. My grandfather worked as a survey hand before he bought that ranch. The man could measure distance by eye better than most people could with equipment. Hearing her say that made my blood pressure jump so fast, I thought my ears would ring. But I stayed calm. Always stay calm. One older resident named Frank Delaney raised his hand from the back row and asked if the HOA planned to build more docks near the southern shoreline because his grandkids liked fishing there on weekends. Vanessa answered before I could even open my mouth. That section may eventually become restricted community property, depending on the final legal review. Restricted community property. She said it like the decision had already been made somewhere behind closed doors. That was when I first realized this woman was not bluffing. She honestly believed she could rewrite ownership just by throwing enough paperwork and county language at people until they got confused and gave up. After the meeting ended, a younger couple stopped me outside near the parking lot while construction crews worked under giant floodlights farther down the ridge. The husband looked nervous as hell. Mr. Mercer, he said quietly, do you actually own the lake? Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared beside us like she had radar for private conversations. The Mercer family owns portions of surrounding agricultural land. She interrupted quickly, but all recreational shoreline access falls under ongoing county evaluation. She answered for me before I even spoke. That told me everything. On the drive home that night, I rolled my truck windows down and listened to crickets humming through the dark pasture while the glow from Holloway Shores lit up the ridge behind me like a shopping mall. Then I noticed something strange near the subdivision entrance. Fresh concrete poured around the old survey marker my grandfather installed decades earlier. They were trying to bury it. About 3 weeks after that HOA meeting, I woke up to the sound of engines down by the south pasture before the sun even came up. At first I thought it was one of the neighboring ranchers moving cattle early to beat the heat, but then I heard backup alarms beeping and metal clanging against metal, the kind of sharp construction noise that never belongs anywhere near a quiet lake at dawn. Rufus heard it too. By the time I pulled my boots on and drove the ATV toward the ridge, I already knew Vanessa Holloway was about to pull something. Sure enough, 2 construction trucks and a landscaping crew were parked directly across my ranch road beside the southern shoreline, while workers unloaded stacks of decorative stone and steel fencing onto the grass. One man was spray painting bright orange marks across the dirt like he already owned the place. I killed the ATV engine and asked the foreman what exactly they thought they were doing on my property. The guy barely looked up from his clipboard. Community shoreline expansion, he said. HOA approved. HOA approved. That was becoming Vanessa's favorite phrase. A few minutes later, she showed up in that white Range Rover again, rolling slowly down the gravel path like she was entering a movie scene instead of somebody else's land. She stepped out wearing sunglasses and holding one of those giant insulated coffee cups rich people carry around like accessories. Good morning, Elias, she said cheerfully. Beautiful day for progress. I looked past her toward the workers already digging post holes less than 50 yards from my dock. You are standing on private ranch land, I told her. No easement. No permission. No agreement. Vanessa smiled like I was explaining weather to her. Actually, she replied, the county boundary adjustment finalized yesterday. Then she handed me a folded packet of papers. I still remember the sound that packet made opening in my hands while wind pushed lake mist across the shoreline behind us. Official county forms, revised parcel maps, updated tax parcels, even a notice labeling part of my south pasture as shared waterfront recreational access. Somebody had gone deep into county records to make this look legitimate. That was the moment I realized this was bigger than one power-hungry HOA president. Somebody inside the system was helping her. I drove straight into town after that and parked outside the county appraisal office while sweat rolled down my back through my work shirt because Texas heat in August feels like standing inside a clothes dryer. The clerk behind the counter recognized me immediately. Small town. Everybody knows everybody. Her smile faded the second I slid those revised parcel maps across the desk. Where did these come from? She asked quietly. Your office, apparently, I answered. She checked the computer for nearly 10 minutes without saying another word while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and some old country song played softly through the office radio. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. Mr. Mercer, these updates were rushed through under emergency land review authorization. By who? I asked. She hesitated. County Development Partnership Committee. I had lived in that county 61 years and never once heard of a County Development Partnership Committee. That alone told me something smelled rotten. Before I left, the clerk printed a copy of the revised parcel map history for me and slipped it across the counter. You did not get this from me, she whispered. That paper became important later. Real important. The next morning things escalated fast. I walked outside with my coffee and found giant private HOA access signs hammered into the ground beside my lake road along with yellow ropes stretched between fresh fence posts blocking access to my own shoreline. Somebody had even zip-tied laminated HOA rules onto the posts. No unauthorized boating. No livestock beyond this point. No private shoreline usage without HOA authorization. I just stood there staring at it while morning wind rattled the signs against the posts like cheap wind chimes. Then I noticed tire tracks leading straight across my pasture toward the cemetery ridge where Claire's ashes were scattered beneath the cedar trees. That hit me hard. Some things are sacred. Around noon, I heard another engine coming up the drive and spotted Deputy Ross pulling in beside the barn looking more uncomfortable than ever. He climbed out holding a clipboard and would not meet my eyes at first. Elias, he sighed. I have to serve you with this notice. The paper said I was being formally warned for interfering with approved HOA shoreline development activities. According to the complaint, I had threatened workers and obstructed authorized construction access. None of it was true. Vanessa stepped out of her SUV right behind the deputy, wearing that same calm smile, like she had rehearsed this entire moment in front of a mirror. This could all go much smoother if you stopped fighting progress, she said softly. I looked at the deputy. Ross, you honestly believe this? The poor guy shifted awkwardly and rubbed the back of his neck. I do not know what to believe anymore, he admitted. That was the first honest thing anybody in this mess had said in weeks. Vanessa crossed her arms and glanced toward the lake. The county already made its decision, Elias. I folded the warning notice slowly and slid it into my jacket pocket. Then I looked directly at the fresh survey stakes sticking out of my pasture grass behind her. No, I said quietly. Somebody just changed the paperwork. Things got uglier after that warning notice. Not fast all at once like people imagine when they hear stories like this, but slowly, piece by piece, the way termites eat through wood until one day the whole porch collapses under your feet. Every morning, there was something new. Another survey flag hammered into my pasture. Another HOA sign posted near the shoreline. Another golf cart full of residents cruising across land they suddenly believed belonged to them because Vanessa Holloway kept repeating it confidently enough. Confidence fools people. About a week later, I woke up to fireworks exploding over the lake at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night, while country music blasted from giant portable speakers near my south fence line. Holloway Shores had decided to host a community waterfront mixer directly beside the cedar grove where Claire's ashes were scattered. Families dragged coolers across my grass, while kids chased each other near the dock my father built with his own hands. Somebody even tied balloons to the old fence posts along the cemetery ridge. I sat on the porch watching all of it with my jaw clenched so hard my teeth hurt. Rufus stayed beside me growling low every time another golf cart rolled past the barn. They were not just trespassing anymore. They were erasing boundaries. Around 10 that night, I finally walked down toward the shoreline carrying a flashlight, while bugs bounced against the beam and smoke from barbecue grills drifted through the warm Texas air. A few residents looked uncomfortable when they saw me coming. Probably because deep down most decent people can feel when something is wrong even if they do not fully understand it yet. Vanessa stood near the water laughing with a group of homeowners beside a giant sign that read Private HOA, Lake Access Members Only. Right beside my dock. She spotted me immediately, and her smile tightened. "Elias," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "This is a private resident event." I stopped about 10 feet away from her and looked around at all the folding chairs and coolers spread across my shoreline. "You brought a party onto family burial land," I said calmly. The music kept playing. One woman near the dock lowered her drink slowly and whispered something to her husband. Vanessa crossed her arms. "According to county parcel revisions, this property now falls under shared recreational designation." There she went again with the legal language. Always the same trick. Make ordinary theft sound official enough, and people stop questioning it. I pointed toward the cedar trees. "My wife is buried up there." That shut a few people up real quick. But Vanessa barely blinked. "I am sorry for your loss," she replied in that fake sympathetic voice. But emotional attachment does not override county development law. I still remember hearing cicadas buzzing in the dark while those words hung in the air. Emotional attachment. Like she was talking about an old sofa instead of my family. I turned around and walked back to the house without another word. That bothered her more than yelling would have. The next morning things escalated again. I found fresh tire tracks cutting through my north pasture where several HOA residents had started using my ranch trails as shortcuts for morning jogging and ATV rides. Somebody left soda cans beside one of my cattle troughs and another person dumped fishing bait containers near the lake edge. One of my calves got spooked by drones flying overhead and crashed through a section of old fencing near the creek. Cost me nearly 2 full days repairing everything. Holloway Shores was spreading across my land like oil and water. Then came the cemetery incident. That was the day I almost lost my temper for real. I drove up toward the Cedar Ridge after noticing fresh construction trucks parked nearby and found workers installing decorative wooden benches and solar garden lights less than 30 feet from the stone marker where Claire's ashes were scattered. Somebody from the HOA had decided the ridge would make a perfect sunset scenic overlook for residents. I stood there staring at those benches while workers unpacked landscaping blocks around my family memorial site like they were decorating a public park. One younger worker noticed my expression and quietly said, "Sir, they told us this was HOA common property." I believed him too. Most regular people had no clue what was really happening. That was the part that made this whole thing dangerous. Vanessa was not just targeting me anymore. She was feeding lies to hundreds of people until the lies started becoming reality in their heads. That afternoon I drove into town again and stopped at Buck Ramsey's feed store to grab fencing wire. Buck had known my family since high school football days and usually spent half our conversations complaining about diesel prices or arthritis. This time he looked nervous the second I walked through the door. "Elias," he muttered quietly while scanning the nearly empty store. "You got county people asking questions about your ranch." I froze. "What kind of questions?" Buck leaned closer over the counter. "Asking if you still actively use all your acreage. Asking about abandoned land claims." My stomach dropped hard hearing that phrase. Abandoned land claims. Suddenly, everything started fitting together in my head. The revised parcel maps. The emergency reviews. The shoreline changes. The pressure campaign. Vanessa Holloway was not trying to buy my ranch anymore. She was building a legal story that I had somehow stopped using parts of my own land so the county could justify transferring it into development control. And the worst part was how patient they were being about it. That scared me. Because patient people are dangerous. The next Monday, I stopped trying to argue with people and started digging instead. There is a point in every fight where you realize emotions are useless because the other side already decided you are the villain. And once that happens, the only thing left that matters is proof. Real proof. Paper proof. The kind nobody can talk their way around once it lands on a courtroom table. I drove into county records right after sunrise, carrying a thermos of black coffee and an old leather folder that used to belong to my grandfather. The records building sat behind the courthouse in one of those ugly tan brick government buildings from the 1970s with flickering fluorescent lights and air conditioning so cold it could freeze a snake. Nobody ever looks happy inside county offices. A young clerk at the front desk asked what I needed, and I told her I wanted every parcel revision connected to Holloway Shores over the last 5 years. The second she heard that subdivision name, her face changed just a little. Not much, just enough. That may take a while, she said carefully. I am retired, I replied. I have time. 3 hours later, I was sitting alone in the basement archive room flipping through old survey maps that smelled like dust, mildew, and ancient paper, while ceiling fans clicked overhead loud enough to drive a man crazy. Most people would have quit after the first hour because county land records are boring as hell unless you know what you are looking at. Parcel overlays, easement transfers, tax corridor adjustments, boundary annotations written in tiny engineer handwriting nobody under 60 can still read properly. But my grandfather taught me surveying basics before I was old enough to drive. Lines tell stories, and those lines were screaming. Around noon, an older records supervisor shuffled into the archive room, carrying 2 cardboard boxes, and nearly dropped them when he saw me sitting there. Elias Mercer? He asked. I looked up and recognized him immediately. Walter Grady. Used to work county surveying back in the 1980s before retiring. Had not seen him in almost 15 years. Walter, I said. Did not know they still let you down here. He laughed quietly and set the boxes beside me. Only when the computers break and somebody needs a dinosaur. Then he noticed the Holloway Shores parcel maps spread across my table and his smile disappeared. Oh, he muttered softly. So you finally found it. That sentence hit me like cold water. I asked him what exactly I was supposed to be finding, but Walter glanced toward the hallway, first like he wanted to make sure nobody else was listening. Then he sat down beside me and pointed at one of the revised shoreline overlays from 2 years earlier. See this adjustment right here? He asked. I nodded. Walter tapped the page harder. That revision should never have passed review. Suddenly my heart started pounding. He explained that the original Mercer Ranch survey boundaries had been federally certified in 1968 because part of the lake drainage connected to an old agricultural water management corridor. That meant changing the shoreline boundaries required multiple approval layers, including state environmental review. But somehow Holloway Shores received emergency fast-track authorization through county development offices without complete federal review ever being filed. That should have been impossible, unless somebody buried the paperwork. Walter pulled another map from the box and laid it beside the newer version. Same land, same shoreline, completely different property lines. One map pushed the HOA boundary nearly 40 feet deeper into my ranch pasture compared to the original survey. 40 feet does not sound like much until you stretch it across 83 acres of waterfront property. That is millions of dollars. I stared at the maps while old air vents rattled overhead, and suddenly everything from the last 2 years snapped together in my head, so cleanly it made me sick. The shoreline parties, the emergency parcel reviews, the fake recreational access claims, the construction crews, the buried survey markers. Vanessa Holloway had not been improvising any of this. Somebody planned it from the beginning. Walter, I asked quietly, who approved these revisions? He rubbed his jaw for a long moment before answering. County Development Partnership Committee. There was that name again. That committee does not officially exist, I said. Walter nodded slowly. Exactly. That was when things got really interesting. Walter disappeared into another archive aisle and came back carrying an old ledger binder thick enough to stop a bullet. Inside were handwritten review notes from prior county survey boards going back almost 30 years. Most of it was routine stuff nobody cared about anymore. But buried near the back was a denied development proposal from 6 years earlier tied directly to the land where Holloway Shores eventually got built. The denial reason was highlighted in red ink. Boundary conflict with Mercer Ranch shoreline certification. Existing ownership dispute unresolved. My stomach dropped reading it. Somebody already knew the land boundaries were disputed years before construction ever started. They built anyway. Worse than that, the proposal. carried a developer signature I recognized immediately. Travis Holloway, Vanessa's husband. There it was sitting in black ink plain as day, while dust floated through shafts of basement light around us. They knew. Walter leaned closer and lowered his voice almost to a whisper. Elias, once they realized the original surveys would block expansion permits, somebody started altering digital parcel records little by little over time. Small enough nobody noticed at first. I asked why nobody stopped it. Walter gave me the saddest little laugh I ever heard. Because most people trust computers more than old paper maps now. That line stayed with me. Before I left, Walter handed me photocopies of everything and grabbed my wrist before I walked out the archive room. Do not confront them yet, he warned quietly. If they already pushed this far, they are not scared of county rules anymore. I looked down at the maps in my hands and thought about the deputies parked on my ranch road, the parties near Claire's Memorial Ridge, and the giant HOA sign sitting on top of my grandfather's survey marker. Then I remembered something else too. Holloway Shores was still building new houses along the West Ridge expansion. And according to these original maps, half that new construction was sitting directly on Mercer Ranch land. Most people think the smart move in a situation like mine is to rush into court immediately waving papers and yelling fraud. That is exactly what Vanessa Holloway expected me to do. She wanted an angry old rancher stomping into public meetings so she could paint me as bitter, unstable, and scared of progress. What she did not expect was silence. Dangerous silence. After meeting with Walter Grady, I stopped arguing with the HOA completely. I stopped calling the county office. I stopped complaining about the trespassing and the parties and the golf carts crossing my pasture. I even stopped confronting the construction crews building new homes along the West Ridge where the disputed property lines sat. That confused everybody, especially Vanessa. About 2 weeks later, she showed up at my barn while I was repairing a feed trough beside the cattle pens. Hot wind rolled through the pasture carrying dust and the smell of fresh concrete from the subdivision expansion farther down the ridge. Vanessa climbed out of her SUV wearing another white outfit that probably cost more than my truck and leaned against the door smiling like a woman who thought she had already won. You have been awfully quiet lately, Elias, she said. I kept tightening a rusted bolt with my wrench without looking up. Not much left to say. She studied me carefully for a second. Predators hate uncertainty. Well, she continued, I am glad you are finally accepting reality. The county approved Phase 2 expansion last Friday. That got my attention. Phase 2 sat directly on the most disputed section of Mercer Ranch according to the original survey maps Walter showed me. New roads, new waterfront lots, bigger houses, bigger legal disaster. I finally looked at her. You should be careful building over unresolved property lines. Vanessa laughed softly like I had just made a cute little joke. The property lines are resolved. Then she climbed back into the SUV and drove away, trailing dust behind her. I watched that white vehicle disappear down the ranch road, while one thought kept repeating in my head over and over. Keep building. That afternoon, I drove to Austin and met with a real estate attorney named Daniel Pierce, whose office overlooked Lady Bird Lake from one of those shiny downtown towers full of glass walls and expensive leather furniture. Daniel looked about 50, sharp gray suit, expensive watch, calm eyes. The kind of lawyer who speaks quietly because he never has to raise his voice to control a room. I spread the original survey maps, county revisions, and denied development applications across his conference table while city traffic hummed far below the windows. He spent almost an hour reading everything without interrupting once. Finally, he leaned back slowly in his chair. Mr. Mercer, he said carefully, if these original surveys hold up in court, Holloway Shores is in catastrophic trouble. Catastrophic. That was a beautiful word. Daniel explained that if the development knowingly built homes on disputed land while county approvals were manipulated, the fallout could reach far beyond the HOA itself. Mortgage lenders, insurance companies, title agencies, county officials, developers, everybody connected to the project could get dragged into lawsuits worth tens of millions of dollars. So we stop construction now? I asked. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. Then he shook his head. No, that surprised me. He tapped one finger against the Phase 2 construction permits. Right now they can still claim this is a boundary misunderstanding. But if they fully complete construction after being formally warned about disputed ownership, the liability becomes much harder for them to escape. Suddenly I understood exactly what he meant. Every new foundation they poured made the trap deeper. Every new house increased damages. Every closing contract signed by buyers strengthened future fraud claims. Holloway Shores was digging its own grave, one luxury home at a time. Daniel leaned closer across the table. You do not interrupt a fraud scheme while the other side is still gathering evidence against themselves. I sat there staring through the office windows at downtown Austin traffic, while that sentence settled into my chest like concrete. The smart move was patience. Hard patience. The next few months tested every ounce of restraint I had. Construction exploded across the West Ridge after Phase 2 approvals finalized. Huge houses with black metal roofs and oversized lake windows started rising directly over land my grandfather once used for cattle grazing. Concrete trucks rolled through every morning before sunrise, shaking the ranch road hard enough to rattle dishes inside my kitchen cabinets. Crews bulldozed cedar groves near the disputed shoreline, while giant advertising banners promised future homeowners private waterfront access and exclusive lake community living. Every sign made me angrier. But anger was useless now. I needed records. So I started documenting everything. Dates, photos, parcel markers, construction permits, drone footage, county filings, every truck entering the property, every new foundation poured over disputed land. I filled 3 entire binders within 2 months. Quietly. 1. Evening Deputy Ross stopped by unexpectedly while I was feeding cattle near sunset. The orange light across the lake made the subdivision windows glow like fire in the distance, while nail guns echoed from the West Ridge construction sites. Ross leaned against the fence looking exhausted. I need to ask you something off the record, he said. I nodded. You really think those people built houses on your land? I reached into the truck and handed him one of the original survey overlays Walter copied for me. Ross studied it for nearly a minute without speaking. Jesus Christ, he muttered finally. Then he looked back toward Holloway Shores where brand new homes stretched across the ridge line like rows of polished teeth. They already sold most of those houses. I know, I answered quietly. Ross rubbed both hands over his face and lowered his voice. Elias, if this blows up the way you think it will. He never finished the sentence. He did not need to, because we both understood the same thing now. Holloway Shores was not just an HOA anymore. It was a ticking bomb. The county hearing happened on a Thursday morning in early October, and by 8 o'clock the parking lot outside the courthouse already looked like a football game tailgate. HOA residents stood around in expensive sunglasses whispering nervously beside golf carts and luxury SUVs, while local reporters carried camera bags through the crowd, trying to figure out why a simple land dispute suddenly involved state investigators, mortgage attorneys, and half the county development office. Holloway Shores residents still thought this was just another complaint from a stubborn old rancher refusing to accept change. They were about to have a very bad morning. I parked my old Silverado beside the courthouse lawn and sat there for a second listening to the engine tick softly while people stared at me through the windows. Some looked curious. Some looked annoyed. A few looked scared already. Good instincts. Daniel Pierce stepped out of the courthouse entrance wearing a charcoal gray suit and carrying 3 thick document cases under one arm. Calm as ever. You ready? He asked. I looked toward the crowd gathering. Near the steps where Vanessa Holloway stood smiling for reporters beside her husband Travis like they were attending a charity fundraiser instead of walking into a legal disaster. Been ready a long time, I answered. Inside the courthouse things felt tense immediately. Every bench in the hearing room filled up fast, while ceiling fans hummed overhead and deputies stood along the walls trying to keep pathways clear. I spotted Deputy Ross near the back avoiding eye contact with almost everybody. Smart man. Vanessa sat confidently at the front table beside 2 attorneys wearing matching navy suits and polished smiles. She even waved politely at several homeowners as they entered like this was another routine HOA meeting about landscaping violations. The woman honestly believed she could talk her way out of anything. Then Daniel opened the first document case. Everything changed after that. The county commissioner started the hearing by summarizing the dispute in dry government language about parcel inconsistencies and shoreline review concerns while people shifted impatiently in their seats. Vanessa's attorney stood first and spent nearly 20 minutes painting me as a bitter landowner resisting lawful development because property values around the lake had increased beyond what I was emotionally prepared to accept. Emotional. There was that word again. According to him, county revisions had already finalized years earlier, all construction permits were legally approved, and Holloway Shores residents had purchased homes in good faith relying on official county documentation. It sounded polished, professional, safe. Then Daniel stood up slowly and wheeled a giant display board into the middle of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said calmly, "before this hearing continues, I would like to establish one very important fact." He uncovered the board. Silence hit the room instantly. Side by side, displayed under courtroom lights, sat two massive survey overlays. One was the current digital county parcel map approving Holloway Shores expansion. The other was the original 1968 federally certified Mercer Ranch shoreline survey signed by state agricultural authorities and county engineers decades before Holloway Shores even existed. The differences were impossible to ignore. Entire sections of the subdivision overlapped directly onto Mercer Ranch property lines. Roads, shoreline access, luxury waterfront lots, even part of the clubhouse parking area. Right there in giant color print for everybody to see. You could hear people stop breathing. Vanessa's smile vanished for the first time since I met her. Daniel started walking the room through the timeline piece by piece while reporters scrambled for notebooks and homeowners leaned forward staring at the displays like somebody had just announced their houses were built on the moon. Original denied development applications, altered parcel revisions, buried shoreline certifications, emergency county fast-track approvals bypassing federal review requirements. Every document connected perfectly, every date lined up. Then Walter Grady took the stand. Old man shuffled up slowly, carrying rolled survey maps under one arm, while the courtroom stayed dead quiet except for the squeak of his shoes against the floor. Walter explained how original Mercer Ranch boundaries had been digitally altered over several years through unofficial county review channels connected to the so-called Development Partnership Committee. Then came the part that detonated the room. That committee, Walter said clearly into the microphone, does not legally exist under county charter authority. Pure chaos. Homeowners started talking all at once, while one woman near the back actually stood up yelling that her bank approved the property title before deputies told everybody to sit down. Vanessa looked frozen beside her attorneys while Travis Holloway whispered furiously into somebody's phone. But Daniel was not finished yet. He introduced drone footage showing current Holloway Shores construction directly crossing original federally certified survey boundaries. Then he displayed mortgage disclosures promising buyers protected waterfront access rights on land the developers never legally owned in the first place. That was the moment panic truly hit the room. Because now everybody understood. This was not just an HOA dispute anymore. Their mortgages were tied to potentially fraudulent land claims. One homeowner stood up pale as a ghost and shouted toward Vanessa. "You told us everything was cleared legally." Vanessa tried recovering fast. "It is cleared legally," she snapped back. "This is fear-mongering." Then Daniel calmly placed one final document onto the projector screen. The denied development application signed 6 years earlier by Travis Holloway acknowledging unresolved Mercer Ranch boundary conflicts before construction ever began. Signed. Dated. Filed. Travis knew. The entire room exploded. Homeowners started shouting questions while reporters rushed toward the front rows and county officials whispered frantically among themselves. One older couple looked like they might cry. Deputy Ross just stared at the floor. Vanessa finally stood up red-faced and furious, pointing toward me across the courtroom. "He waited," she yelled. "He let people buy those homes knowing there was a dispute." Every eye in the room swung toward me. I stood slowly beside Daniel and looked around at all the terrified homeowners packed into those benches. Then I answered the only honest way possible. "No," I said quietly. "Your husband kept building after the warnings were already filed. You could have heard a pin drop." Daniel slid another document toward the county commissioner. Formal notice receipts proving Holloway Shores developers received written legal warnings about disputed boundaries months before finishing Phase 2 construction. Certified mail. Signed deliveries. Time stamped. They built anyway. That was the moment Vanessa Holloway finally understood the trap had already closed. The fallout hit Holloway Shores faster than a Texas thunderstorm. Within 48 hours of that county hearing, Construction stopped across the entire West Ridge expansion, while bright orange legal notices got stapled onto unfinished homes still smelling like fresh paint and sawdust. Contractors vanished almost overnight. Golf carts disappeared from the shoreline trails. Even the giant waterfall fountain at the subdivision entrance stopped running after county investigators froze several development accounts tied to Travis Holloway's company. Silence finally came back to the ranch. The first strange thing was how quickly people stopped acting confident once lawyers and banks got involved. Homeowners who used to glare at me from behind gated fences suddenly started showing up at my porch carrying folders full of mortgage paperwork, asking questions in nervous voices. One older couple from Illinois sat at my kitchen table nearly in tears after learning their waterfront property line might not legally exist the way the developer promised. "Mr. Mercer," the husband asked quietly, "are we going to lose our house?" I looked at those two scared retirees and honestly felt bad for them. Most of the residents were not villains. They were regular people who trusted the wrong people. "I am not trying to throw families out of their homes," I told them. "I just wanted my land back." That mattered. Daniel Pierce moved fast after the hearing. Federal survey teams arrived within 2 weeks carrying tripods, drones, and enough measuring equipment to look like NASA landed beside the lake. They spent days walking the disputed shoreline, while county officials followed behind, sweating through expensive shirts every time another original survey marker got uncovered exactly where the old maps said it would be. One by one, the truth kept surfacing out of the dirt. Literally. Turns out my grandfather's original iron survey pins had never moved. Holloway Shores built right over them. The state eventually launched a formal fraud investigation into the development approvals tied to Travis Holloway's company, along with several county officials connected to the fake development partnership committee. Once investigators started pulling emails and financial records, things got ugly fast. Very ugly. Deputy Ross stopped by one evening near sunset, while I was sitting on the dock cleaning fishing gear. The lake looked peaceful again for the first time in months, with no fireworks, no drones, no HOA patrol carts buzzing around the shoreline. Just wind moving softly through the cedar trees and water slapping against old wood pilings. Ross sat down beside me without speaking. For a minute. Then he finally sighed. "I owe you an apology. I kept working the fishing line through my hands. You were doing your job." "Maybe," he replied quietly. "Still should have listened sooner." I looked out across the water toward Holloway Shores, where half-finished luxury homes now sat dark and silent behind temporary legal fencing. "Most people trust paperwork," I said. "That is why bad people work so hard to fake it." Ross nodded slowly, like that sentence hit him harder than expected. Vanessa Holloway disappeared from public view almost immediately after the investigation expanded. Rumor around town said she and Travis hired separate attorneys once financial records started surfacing connected to the altered county parcel revisions. Funny how fast loyalty dies when prison becomes part of the conversation. The HOA itself got dissolved by emergency county order before Christmas after insurance companies pulled coverage and lenders froze pending home sales connected to the disputed shoreline properties. Just like that, all those fancy meetings and violation letters and fake authority vanished into smoke. Power built on lies never lasts. In the end, the legal settlement took nearly 11 months to finalize. Mercer Ranch regained full, certified ownership over the disputed shoreline acreage, along with financial compensation tied to unauthorized land usage and construction damages. Several homeowners negotiated revised property agreements allowing them to keep their houses under corrected boundary easements, which honestly was the outcome I wanted all along. Families deserved stability. The people truly responsible were the ones who thought they could bury old property lines under enough money and paperwork. They learned otherwise. One cold January morning, I drove down toward the old subdivision entrance after county crews removed the giant Holloway Shores stone sign from above my grandfather's buried survey marker. I stood there watching workers haul broken pieces of fake luxury branding into dump trucks, while winter wind rolled across the pasture carrying that clean cedar smell I remembered from childhood. Underneath all that expensive landscaping and decorative concrete sat the same old iron survey pin my grandfather hammered into the ground back in 1968. Still there after all these years. Still telling the truth. Later that afternoon, my grandson Caleb came out to the ranch carrying a fishing pole almost taller than he was. and together we walked down to the dock, while orange sunset light spread across the lake. He pointed toward one of the uncovered survey markers near the shoreline and asked, "Grandpa, why did everybody fight over those little metal posts?" I smiled and handed him the tackle box. "Because people forget something important," I told him. "Land remembers who it belongs to." Then we cast our lines into the water while evening mist drifted across the lake, and the ranch finally felt like home again.